Hi everybody, this is Didi from In the Know Radio, and today we're going to be speaking with our guest, Alena Guest. Alena Guest is a certified medical support hypnotherapist, and in addition to running a private practice, in 2010, Alena was approved as the staff hypnotherapist by the Mendocino Coast District Hospital, and since then has provided services to their patients. She has assisted patients with conditions ranging from morning sickness all the way to a more graceful life's end. Ms. Guest is also an educator providing inspiration and instruction for numerous organizations, including organizations such as the California Business Association, the Mendocino Coast Clinics, the International Medical and Dental Hypnotherapy Association, the Mendocino Cancer Resource Center, and numerous hypnosis conventions. Alena not only uses her work with hypnotherapy to help restore health, but also to encourage the resiliency of the human spirit, and by reuniting people with their authenticity. Alena feels privileged to be able to do what she calls her great life's works. So, thank you so much for being here, Alena.
Thank you very much for asking me.
So you work in hospitals. Is this fairly new for the field of hypnosis to have a hypnotherapist on staff?
Well, I find out that it is. I can tell you that when everything fell into place that I would be asked to be an allied staff member at our local hospital, I didn't realize at first that it was so rare. And then, I began to understand by the reaction of some of the organizations I belonged to in the school that I graduated from that this was, that I had something of a cachet, I guess.
It's a unique
opportunity. And that's too bad. I mean, I just, and actually I do know that it's happening more and more, but it's surprising that it's only now,
Sure, because hypnosis has been around for thousands of years.
Exactly.
And so what's the response to the things you're able to do? I'm sure you can decrease pain, bleeding, all of the typical things hypnotherapy is known for.
Well, yes. Let me tell you something, though. This may not surprise you, or it may. The way this actually happened, that I was asked to be on staff, had a lot to do with being at the right place at the right time, as is often the case. And I prepared the CEO of the hospital for his first surgery. And in his case, he not only wanted, of course, less blood loss. What he really wanted was not to have to take much pain medicine, as little pain medicine as possible, and be back to work as soon as possible. And he was ready to go back to work in 24 hours. His wife said, nothing doing. And so she insisted he wait a couple more days, but he certainly was off pain medication in the first 24 hours. And he became my best, referral base, because, and then when it came time, and there's a lot more to that story, but when it came time to consider bringing in somebody as an allied staff member in a complementary capacity, you can understand. I was the first person
you're
he
the
thought
natural
of.
choice,
yes.
For sure.
And so, yes, the CEO was a great fan of mine, as was the chief clinical officer. But when it came time to do my first presentation to the staff of doctors and surgeons at a medical staff meeting, I was, to say the least, surprised, because I had done due diligence and had prepared bringing abstracts with me, really good evidence-based material. And I even tailored the talk to the people that I expected were going to be there. And they never looked up from their papers, excuse me. They were all just looking down. They never even looked up and smiled or even gave me eye contact. Writing, they're all so busy. And because I'm so passionate about what I do, I love this work so much,
right.
I really, for practically the first time in my life, didn't take it personally. I just thought, well, I know that what I have to say and my work isn't at fault, so it must be some limiting beliefs that they have. And in fact, then I had my opportunity to speak to them, and then the last part of the meeting was closed to me, and so I was ushered out, and the chief clinical officer who was chairing that meeting emailed me afterwards and said, "They all laughed when you left the room." And I still wasn't cowed. Now, this kind of boldness is not something I had ever before my own hypnotherapeutic intervention. It really changed me. And so, and I'm not assertive or aggressive or bold about anything else really except this work, because my belief is so strong. And so I did this. I still am amazed. I called 2 of those doctors and said, "Have coffee with me. I want to know how I can reach you better." And so one of those doctors with whom I had coffee right away, the oncologist, said, "Over coffee, I realize that the reason I haven't been referring to people like yourself is that it's a tacit admission of my own failure."
Oh my goodness.
And after that, he was far more open to me. He became another referral partner. So what's happened over time is that I've won the doctors over, gradually. Not everyone, certainly. There's still some people on staff. I overheard what Melissa said. There are going to be people, the kind of the old guard, who I realize are not going to recognize, that what we do is support. Another example, though, one of those doctors who was there is a surgeon, and she had admitted, and that's one of the cases you referred to in your introduction. But I want to say this because there's a wonderful thing that she said. She brought me in because she'd been working with somebody in the emergency room who was in her first trimester of pregnancy, who was so dehydrated that no antiemetic was working. She was so nauseous that they were really worried about her, and she was highly anxious. And so they, as a last resort, they said, "Well, let's try hypnotherapy."
Alena.
And so they brought me in, and of course, in less than 50 minutes, I not only had her dialed down from certainly over a 10 down to a 2, a very solid 2, and I taught her how to recreate this for herself, and she was released the next day. And so I found out that at the next medical staff meeting, that attending physician said, "I have to admit, hypnosis works better than any drug we have."
Wow, that is something else for a doctor to say that.
Yes, yeah. And so this is what I mean about, winning people over time. And it's so important to keep on, and even if the doors initially close, or even if it seems like, you're not being respected, or, I feel this way.
It's not personal.
Yeah, it's not personal at all. And we know in doing this work with people, how efficient it is, how elegant
very
it
fast,
is.
yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons I call it the great work of my life. I just
Wonderful.
I love being in service.
So how did you get into it in the first place? Like, you mentioned something about your own hypnotherapeutic transformation.
I'm so glad that you said that. I had a hypnosis session with somebody in my area who's now retired, and it was remarkable, of course. And I thought, well, this is really amazing. I want to investigate this. So I went to a school and I got wonderful training there. And at the Hypnotherapy Academy of America, I'm sure that's fine to say. And I love the quality of the training that I got there. And during the course of the time, I was there for the whole thing. I stayed for, of course, as much medical training as I could possibly get, but also even for past life regression and natal regression. And naturally, I was a guinea pig. I was working on other students. I was being worked on. And I had a natal regression. And I knew that I was born 2 months early. I knew that, and I even knew that oftentimes preemies have what's called lanugo, which is a very light protective covering of hair all over the body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what you have, but by the time most babies are born, it's gone, you know, if they go to term. Well, for some reason, my whole life up until then, I had felt kind of unattractive and unworthy and unlovable, and I'd tried everything,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I thought, self-help books and psychiatry,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing really made a dent or certainly worked permanently. And I had gotten to this place where I thought, well, I'm just going to live with that and make the best of it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, during the natal regression, I was regressed to my birth. And at the moment of birth, I felt my mother recoil from me. And I heard her say, "This can't be my baby. It's ugly. It looks like a monkey."
Oh, wow.
And I just thought, that was like, what an aha moment. I realized, well, of course, if your own mother
Is telling you
rejects you and says you're ugly, you know, you have a face that even your mother doesn't love, it spoke a Library's Congress worth of volumes, and it completely transformed that belief that I had, and I realized there's nothing intrinsically wrong with me, you know, I'm okay. You know, I look good enough. I'm worthy, and so I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I called my husband back in California. I said, "Honey, guess what? You're not going to have to work so hard to make me believe that I'm, you know, lovable and beautiful." And he said, "Well, I'll probably keep doing it." And I said, "Yeah, but the point is, babe, you're not going to have to do it anymore because I can meet you halfway. I was never able to do that before." That's the power of this work. And so there's more to the story, though. This is really something. The wonderful student who led me through that natal regression with my coach, Patrick Singleton, there, that woman the next day came to me and she said, "I had a dream last night. And in the dream, this lovely, dark-haired woman approached me and said, 'Tell Alena that she's beautiful and I love her.'" And she described the woman, and I said, "Oh, that's my mom."
Wow.
And then another student at the school who had not attended my regression, knew nothing about it, and did not overhear this person, came to me later in the day, and she said, "You know, it's really funny. I had this dream last night, and this dark-haired woman approached me and said, 'Tell Alena she's beautiful and I love her.'"
There you go. I mean,
and I know the word you want to say. I mean, that is one of the most remarkable things that's ever happened to me in my life.
tapping into like even the metaphysical realms
Yes.
somehow.
And so, what do you think? What do you think? I hit the ground running after that. I just thought, wow, if this can do this for me,
Imagine.
I
Yeah.
want to do this work with people. And you know, I just decided to get all the best medical training I could. I got wonderful training at the school with Dr. Robert Sapien and Tim Simron, who wrote a text, Medical Hypnosis. But after that, immediately, I took classes with Seth Deborah Roth and Melissa Roth and Dr. John Butler. And, you know, I just kept on, and Michael Elner
Right.
most recently. And so, you know, I just always want to be able to give the best value.
It's a beautiful gift to give someone to feel good about themselves.
Indeed.
But now what about the patients at the hospital? Because a lot of them are really suffering by the time they get to the
Yes.
hospital. So whether, it's morning sickness, or as you say, you help with a more graceful life's end.
Yes, I've done that a number of times.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, because, I mean, if you're given the diagnosis that unfortunately you're going to die, there's a couple different ways you can go through it.
Yeah.
You can be like clenching the side of the bed and, just in pure fear and panic. How is it that you help people? What have you seen through your work?
Well, there are a wide variety of cases. Everyone's different, as you know.
They are.
And you know, I'm remembering one woman who I helped in the hospital who was not only full of fear, but she could not latch on to anything that made her life seem valuable enough that she was able to let go. As you know, she couldn't find anything consciously that was her own gift, that she had given or she was leaving. But when I led her into trance, she said, I was an opera singer, and I sang so beautifully, and people used to stand and give me ovations. And her whole face changed, and she said that she was comfortable, and her pain, you know, went down, and she just was smiling, and there was grace in this because she found that after all she had given a great gifts and that she had value, and so I mean, of course, all I did was a midwife to lead her to her own memory of this great value. So that's one person. Then I'm thinking of another who had been a professor of Native American Studies at UCLA, a poet, an author, remarkable, strong, sensitive woman who was of Native American descent, as you might have guessed. And what she wanted was not induced by drugs, but using hypnosis as she was getting close to the end of her life, to be able to do a kind of future pacing and meet up with her Native American ancestors. And so she did this, and we did this remarkable journey, you know, that I was in part leading her, but in part in training, and really able to accompany, hearing what it was like for her to accompany these ancestors and saying, I'm on my way, I'm meeting you soon. And it was, and she was poetic, and it was so moving. Yeah.
If you've got to go through it, it's how do you want to go through it? I remember when I worked with my aunt when she was dying, somehow whenever I put her into hypnosis, this beautiful woman would show up and take her hand on the beach, and my aunt would get really calm. And in my mind I was saying, what is this, a metaphysical guide? Is it her, just something that her mind is making up for her to feel? I never did figure it out, but it really calmed her down. Really, this woman would take her and walk her along the beach, and she was wearing flowing white and beautiful. I think it helped her. Yeah. So we can really help people with things like that. So what else have you seen that you would call astounding in terms of people's health turning around as a result of hypnosis?
Well, I recently worked with a woman who had been in chronic pain owing to pancreatitis for years, which had only been made worse by surgeries, and then was so determined to even ignore her pain that she tried to get up on a horse, literally, in a horseback ride, and broke her leg, and just had surgery after surgery, and so much work on her that actually did not improve the situation. And so she was in that place of, I would say, learned helplessness. And hopeless, I'm sure, too. Yes. And, isn't that the phrase, actually? Learned hopelessness, not helplessness?
No, it is. Actually, it's learned helplessness. I think it's Martin Seligman wrote a whole book on how we can feel helpless. But I think that brings on hopelessness. Okay. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Chicken or the egg?
Very graceful.
Chicken or the egg?
It was very graceful. And we did a number of sessions after which she has gone back to painting and is not afraid as the day advances that her pain is going to come back. She always would be afraid to even eat, because that's exactly when it would hurt her the most in her abdomen. And it was really interesting. I find it, and you probably do too, that it's so important to really get a good interview, of course, especially because you want to establish rapport. It's everything, you know. People really want to know that they're being listened to.
And they want to feel safe.
And they want to feel safe, and that they can trust you. And in her case, what I really heard was she had dissociated, which she didn't call it that, but I realized she told me that she dissociated when she'd given birth to her sons.
Oh.
And I realized, well, there's a clue. I can use dissociation
for the pain.
And yes, and then of course, when I reintroduced her to that, knowing that she had skill in that way, she was able to do this herself.
That's amazing,
course, you know, that really started to give her that sense of hope again. And that gave me a real in, so I could really work with her. So she got to the place where she's back in her studio and she's painting and she's...
And pretty much pain-free, because she controls it, right? Yeah, so you teach people how to manage their own pain.
Yes.
And just for our audience who doesn't, what is dissociation, just so they understand it?
Oh, well, it's if you imagine that you lift up and that you're looking down at yourself, so you're like a witness, and you can see yourself from a distance, but it is really as if you are outside of yourself, like you've...
And that person's having the pain.
Yeah, and the person down here is having the pain, but you're just
okay.
watching, you're just a witness, you know, almost like you're watching a movie.
Yeah.
Is that a good enough description?
Yes, it's spot on. It's spot on. And by the way, Dr. Milton Erickson, who is probably one that we all modeled,
yes.
He used to do that. He used to say, okay, so he'd put the person, say, put yourself in that other bit, and it's that person over there. So that was a technique he used often, was dissociation for pain management.
But I want to tell you about another gentleman too, who this is such an interesting case, because he had lung cancer, and the reason I even use that lilt in my voice is he was okay with it. You know, in fact his wife had died. He was an elderly man, and he was really wanting to join her, and so it isn't that he had much reluctance about the fact that he knew it wouldn't be long, you know, before he joined her. However, his oncologist needed him to take an MRI, and he was claustrophobic, and he wouldn't do it. And so in this case, he wasn't at the hospital. I made a home visit, and and I noticed that he had a little cross around his neck, and I said, oh, what religion are you? And oh boy, did he want to tell me. And he wanted to tell me about his church. And I said, oh, what did you do at your church? And he said, oh, I used to love to even clean it. I loved just the little container of my beautiful little church. He said, I just cleaned it like almost with a Q-tip. And I said, great. I want you to really picture your church and seeing yourself there. And he would really get himself there. And I said, and when you were there, wasn't the presence of the divine there with you? He said, oh yes, that's where it is the best, and I would always just feel the Lord with me. And then I said, oh great, so I want you to imagine that the next time you're going to get into that container, it's like the MRI, this time you're just going to close your eyes and you're going to feel that place of worship around you and the presence of the divine. And of course, he was able to do this really well, and the oncologist was thrilled, and it wasn't long before he joined his wife. But he did this in a way that it was a win-win-win for everybody, And his son was so grateful to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you've had this happen. You know, families are so pleased too that he's a photographer, and he said, "Please, I made a beautiful photograph of pelicans flying over the water, and I want to give that to you as a way of saying thank you for what you did for my dad."
Sounds like you just love your work.
Yes, I love it. I love being in service. It's true. I do love that.
Now, bringing people back to their authenticity, or making the human spirit resilient. Talk to us a little bit about what that looks like when you bring them back into their authenticity and how that helps them.
Well, that's my favorite work.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that's my favorite work,
Mm-hmm.
because at the core of it, you know, it's about connecting to the authentic self, the core, the true self, if you like. And so many issues that we deal with, there is certainly a piece of that needs to be accessed in order for change to happen. And so, you know, that's really something that I love.
Is that, it sounds like you're getting back to who they are and their purpose.
Well, in some cases, if
Okay.
that's what they came
Yeah.
to me for. But I'm really talking about, you know, when you connect to that place that is not your ego.
Oh, I see, the true them.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're getting them.
Then they're connected to Source and everyone else, and and there's the paradox of one's own special quality that is unique in all time and in the whole universe, of course, but at the same time, it actually connects you to everyone else for whom that's also true. And we know that's what happens, you know, in trance. We were talking before you started recording about the fact that I'm a painter, and I've also experienced that myself in a very pure way as an artist, because if I try to control it and my ego is involved, and I think, oh, I know what this painting is going to turn out to be, believe me, much more of the time it's a flop than if I just open up and allow what I don't even know is possible, you know, rather than thinking I know what it's going to be. If I open up and allow something else to come through. And this is also the same energy, the same thing that happens when we entrain, when we connect with people at that level and open up to even more of a possibility than they ever imagined was possible, so that they can love themselves more than ever, like I
I was going to say, you're the perfect
but
example.
Because I found that, you know, I call myself, I don't know if you know this, you know, I'm not just an ambassador for this work, I'm an evangelist for this work. I love it. And so, because I realized, even at my advanced age, for heaven's sakes, that you know, this could happen for me, of course I would want other people to have that.
Yes, well, yeah, exactly. You said it. If you can feel good about yourself, then, I mean, you make life a lot easier for people around you, because sometimes it can be difficult when someone is so insecure. Everybody around them kind of walks on eggshells. And we see that person for who they are, but they don't see them for who they are. So it's difficult for people around a person who, for whatever reason, and how many times does it go back to what we call initial sensitizing event?
Yes.
It does. I mean, that one suggestion, which brings up a good point, prenatal and perinatal regression. There's a digital recorder up here, isn't there? We have everything stored in there.
Yeah.
Is there anything you've seen where you've just been like, wow,
oh,
I can't believe you.
Yes. And I work with a fellow who had, once again, many surgeries. He had almost died on the operating table many, many times, and was not a healthy man when I saw him naturally. And he was scheduled to have yet another surgery. He was really scared. And we did a lot of work with many different strategies. And I was surprised because the work is usually so efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he was a good subject, he was still frightened. And I certainly didn't want him to, continue with the surgery feeling like that. So he said, I'd like to try a past life regression. And I said, well, sure. I have the training. I'd be happy to do that with you. Well, lo and behold, once he was regressed, he went back to a life where he thought he was responsible for his wife's death. And that because of that, he carried this false guilt over into this life, and that he deserved to die. And so that almost dying on the operating table so many times, that was him thinking, I deserve to die.
Wow.
And after our session, he went through that surgery just fine, lost weight, didn't have to wear his colostomy bag anymore. He just was a changed man. The next time I saw him at the post office, I honestly didn't recognize him because he looked so different. His whole aspect
And
had
how old
changed.
was he when you did that? Like, I'm just curious how long he had to wait before he could feel good.
I think he's a man in his 50s.
And what a shame.
Exactly.
Oh, he had to go through so much misery.
Yeah, but the point is,
He transformed.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. At least even from 50 or on,
Yeah.
he could experience a good life.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to leave our listeners with something, just some little nugget of wisdom about this thing we call our unconscious mind, maybe how we could direct it, how we could use it, that would be most beneficial, what would you want to say to them?
I'd like to just tell you a story.
Absolutely, go ahead.
rather than saying, oh, these are words of wisdom, I'd rather tell you a story. So, when I was around 7 years old, I made a painting of an underwater scene, mostly with the way children would draw a fish, kind of like a little Catholic symbol, that kind of fish. But I had coral and I had other things under the water. Well, let's just fast forward all the way to 2000, and what I'm trying to say is the 9/11, when 9/11 happened, and I was outraged, and I wanted to. And the way I expressed my outrage was with a painting, and so I did a painting with a woman bursting up out of the surface of the water with a flying fish over her, and then seals right at the surface of the water, and then squids, and then going down to fish, and then coral, and there was trash at the bottom of the sea, and a destroyed American flag. And then I only realized recently actually, when I looked at this painting, that I had not only already known at 7 years old what my future work was going to be, because that was a metaphor of the underwater being the subconscious and the water line and bursting up. That was me, living in both the conscious and the subconscious, and even the flying fish, which after all lives in both worlds, was a totem. And so it was as if my smart little 7-year-old already knew what my calling was, what the great work of my life would be, or if I found it. And then I had to paint it in a mature way to then be able to look at it doing this work, and then realize that subconscious part of me, my creative genius, if you will, always knew it.
That leads to more interesting discussions and questions. Past life regression, have you ever regressed anyone into the in-between state?
Well,
They call it in-between lives.
Yeah, I've used that, the inner life, and I use it even with past life regressions. It's necessary to bring one from their past life through the inner life in order to bring them back, of course, to this life. So
Right.
so I have, but if you're really asking if I've done a session just in that in-between place, no.
No, but I'm just kind of curious because, you know, hypnotherapists often comment that we come down to this earth, we choose a life for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So when you said the 7-year-old you drew the picture of what you would become, basically like you recreated this painting, the same one you had when you were 7, just in a more mature way.
Yeah.
So do you believe it's true that we have to a certain degree, a predestined life based on what you've seen trance subjects go through?
Certainly, in my own experience as well. Yes, I do believe that. It is so tempting, almost every day of our lives, to look at something so closely and just with our, waking conscious mind, alert conscious mind, to judge something as, just your circumstances. We don't yet know, most time while we're living it, that those circumstances that seemed so challenging, so hard, would prove our own resilience, our own heroism. All of us are heroes. All of us are heroines. Every single client who tells me their story, that's what I meant by resiliency. We hear remarkable stories from people's mouths every day about their own quiet heroism. And it is those things that we think are maybe the bad things that actually show us what our character is and what we're capable of. And yes, we're phoenixes and we can rise up out of the ashes over and over again. I certainly have, and I know my clients have.
You've definitely showed us that. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's been my pleasure.